Hello, this is Evan Rogerson, and I'm Muttergang here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a simple engineering notebook. I'm going to be walking through this step by step, and I'm not planning to have any cuts in this video. It'll just be one take. I might have a couple parts sped up just to show you it's not as hard as you think it is to make a simple notebook. There are far too many cases of events not giving out awards, like the design awards sometimes, but more commonly the innovate award, and there's not really any excuse for this. Like, it's not hard to get these awards. You don't have to put in a lot of effort. And there's a lot of people who do put in a lot of effort, but they clearly haven't read the guide to judging. There's very specific pieces of information that you need to have in your notebook. I have seen plenty of teams that have clearly put hundreds of hours into their notebooks, but it's not fully developed. It doesn't meet the criteria of the rubric, and it'll get looked at for less than 30 seconds and then never looked at again. And then there are other teams. I know a specific example of a team who spent maybe about 10 hours on their notebook and actually ended up winning Innovate at a Worlds qualifying event. So, like, it's not hard to make something basic that can meet the rubric criteria well. So this is just kind of going to be like a simple tutorial. I'm not going to be delving into super advanced stuff. This isn't how to win design award at a signature event. It's how to make a basic notebook that should essentially make sure that you're not going to events that don't have awards being handed out. Or if they do, I mean, part of it is both interview and notebook, but this is mostly going to be focused on the notebook aspect. You still need to have a competent interview, but there's not as many strict criteria on the interview that you have to meet as opposed to the notebook. So I'm just kind of going to walk you step by step how to create something super simple that meets all the points. Because there's no reason at events, especially like, I think the worst one that I can think of is Mecha Mayhem Middle School, didn't hand out Innovate Award. A signature event did not hand out a judged award because nobody met the criteria. Like, anyways, let's go ahead and get into it. So, first thing you can see here that we need to do is, well, we'll make a title page first. So, let's go ahead and swap over to title, and I'll be using Google Docs for this because I think that this is the easiest way to notebook. It's not necessarily going to be the prettiest looking notebook, but if you go to the guide to judging, here we go. Different teams may submit different varying levels of sophistication and beautification, but judges should be cognizant of evaluating the content of the notebook, not the level of beautification. So it's not how nice your notebook looks, it's the content you get across. So if you're just trying to make something real quick and simple, Google Docs is what I would definitely recommend, and it's probably what I'll do next year just because it's fastest. I used slides last year, but you spend a lot more time formatting than I'd like to spend next year. So title, we'll just go ahead and call this 123A notebook. And that's really all you need. Now, Control-Enter, make a page break. So in here, we're going to go ahead and do Insert Table of Contents. So you can see right down there we have it, and we're just going to go ahead and insert that. And that's kind of going to fill itself in as we go ahead and keep doing things. So let's go back down. Now we have Heading 1. And first thing on our engineering notebook rubric that we need to hit is identify the problem. So let's just write that out. And as you can see, we can update the table of contents, and it's also going to have our page number there. And we can also just go up to, I believe, Insert. And then we can scroll down to Page Numbers here and just add our page numbers wherever we want. So here I'm just going to put them down in the bottom right corner. So already going to be filling in that. Now identify the problem. Let's go make sure we're back to normal text. And the key things that we need to do is identify the game and robot design challenges in detail at the start of each design process cycle with words and pictures, and state our goals for accomplishing the challenge. Now, you're probably not actually going to score in the expert category, but it's a good idea to shoot for that, because even if we don't have enough detail, we're still most likely going to end up in the proficient category. Your main thing is to avoid emerging, because if you get emerging in any of these first four sections, then your notebook will not be considered fully developed. So it's very important that you do this. So let's get some words, pictures, and goals. So for this, I'll just be using the high stakes game. So let's kind of go over here. And let's grab a picture of the field. And the way that I typically like to format things with this is if you go and insert a table. And we'll go ahead and make this 2 columns wide, and let's go ahead and put our picture over there. Now over here, we can just yap something about real quick. And while that's probably not going to get the detail at the start of each design process, we are at least mentioning some of our problems. And now let's kind of go ahead and repeat this with some of the other game objects that we have. In here you have mobile goals. I'm just listing out the basics. This is what a mobile goal is, some brief information about it. And then something that a lot of teams miss is just put some analysis on it. Like, this is similar to mobile goals from Tipping Point. It's something we can take inspiration on. You're not just copy pasting facts out of the game manual, you're actually putting in a little thought behind it. And now let's go ahead and repeat this for some other things like the rings and the ladder. Alright, so now we've just given a brief description of what the game elements are. It's not super detailed. It's not going to end up scoring on the in detail section, but we have described the challenges with words and pictures. So we know we're going to at least hit that section. So we also need to add some goals. Then there's one other really important thing that we mentioned, which is citations. And it's important that we have citations on these images, both for the independent inquiry criteria section, which I always take off points if teams don't have proper citations there, and because of the student-centered guidelines. It specifically mentions citations down here. And it's actually really nice because they tell you exactly what information they're looking for in the citations. There is no excuse for you to not have citations in your notebook. And it's very explicit in what citation information you should need. So we have the title of the resource or source code. In this case, that is the V5RC High Stakes 4.0 PDF. So under each and every one of these images, let's kind of go, maybe we'll do half-size font. That's our title of the source. Go back, the authors, that is the Game Design Committee. The date of publication or release, I am currently using the 4.0 game manual update, which is April 2nd, 2025. Make sure I spell that correctly. Version, this is version 4.0 that I am currently using. And location, where to find the source. Let's just copy that link and put it in. It's not hard to have citations. That's quite literally all we need for these game manual pictures. So let's go ahead and paste these under these pictures. And again, it's important that you have citations for everything. Like, there's no... If you don't make the image yourself, it should have a citation on it. Now let's kind of go on and set some goals for what this design cycle is going to be. So Control-Enter, get a new page break, set it up to heading 1. And let's set robot goals. There we go. And go down, we have a new thing, and let's just make sure that our table of contents is updating properly. Yep, you can see as I reset that, our page numbers are up to date, and our goals are up to date. And something else that we might want to consider doing is dating these entries. I'm doing all of these entries on the exact same day, so that's not super relevant, but under here I could maybe go... And we can go ahead and just put this under all of our entries. That way we can help meet some of the later points, which I'll kind of get to with notebook format and maybe record of team and project management. Although a lot of teams lie when they make up their dates, and the judges can't tell. Like, I'm being completely honest there, and they're not even supposed to take points off even if they know that you've been backdating, because they're supposed to just grade the notebook that's handed to you. But it is important that you look at other things, like... This is dated for April 21st, but I'm referencing material that came out April 2nd. So if I put any material, like if I dated this entry for March 2nd, I would know that you faked this notebook entry because you somehow looked into the future, got pictures that didn't exist yet, and sent them back into your notebook. So just for this, I'm going to go ahead and say that we did these April 2nd as soon as the game manual update came out, and that's just so that I can make a nice Gantt chart later on to show you time management. So again, robot goals. Let's go ahead, and I usually do insert table, even if I'm not trying to stagger a bunch of things. That's just kind of going to make things a little bit easier. And it's important that our goals are concrete, and I always like to give an explanation for why these are your goals. So let's go ahead and call goal 1. Alright, so we listed a goal, and that's enough to technically meet the criteria, but let's go ahead and give that some explanation. So alright, and then it does say goals plural in the guide to judging, so let's just go ahead and make up some other goals. So and I don't know why I have 3 there, but now we have 2 goals. Ideally, you would have more goals here, more specific goals, things like be able to score 20 rings in 30 seconds. Specific things like that are good because you need to be able to go back and reflect on these goals later and say, did we meet the criteria or did we not? So we have a goal for when we need to have things completed by and what it needs to be able to do here, which is the bare minimum that you should have. And we have robot goals done. So if you look at purely what the rubric's asking for, we have words, pictures, and we have goals stated as well. So now let's go ahead and move on to brainstorming. Oops. Alright, so brainstorming has by far the most specific criteria, which makes it the easiest to cheese and get a high score with minimum effort, but also the most things that you need to specifically do. And if you don't do these things, you will lose points. So the first one is list 3 or more possible solutions to the challenge with labeled diagrams. So 3 or more solutions. Do not have 1 or 2 solutions on your brainstorming, because that will be 2 to 3 points. If you have 3 or more, that'll be 4 to 5 points. And an easy way to try and get yourself maybe from a 4, bare minimum, to a 5, maybe add more solutions. Maybe have 4, maybe have 5 solutions. But don't have like 100 solutions, because that screams I'm just like putting stuff down that I'm not actually seriously considering. So I would say like 4 to 5 is a good amount, but 3 is the bare minimum that you should be hitting. And labeled diagrams. Have labeled diagrams of your brainstorm solutions. Don't just say what it is or have a picture with no labels. Then we need citations if these come from outside sources. So to start with, let's go over here, and we're brainstorming a drivetrain, presumably, because we said that we need to be able to move across the field. So let's just kind of start by yapping. So state what we're brainstorming for. In order to move across the field, we will need a drive base. And that's probably also something you could put an identify, like putting a design brief or something in between these 2 sections would be good. But again, it's not required, and this is just kind of a bare minimum showing you how little effort it takes to make something that is still going to meet the criteria. So, shameless plug here, but I do happen to have a video covering all different kinds of drive bases. So let's go ahead and use that as a source here. So this is a tank drive right here. And we can just screenshot that. And we'll put that in there. And we'll get back to that image in a bit later because it's missing a couple of things. So let's just go ahead and say tank drive. And then technically we don't have to put anything about the tank drive, but you should. So just like brief description of what it is. Alright, so now we have that done. We've listed what the solution is. Now, if we go back to the guide to judging, we need labeled diagrams and citations, because this picture, I did make it, but in the context of the notebook, I didn't make it. So let's go ahead right here, and we want to put this, what I like to do is behind text. Now, it's kind of going to freak out, and we want to click on our image, which if you just click, it's not going to do anything. You have to right-click on it and select image, and then we can just kind of move this down to fill our current text box. Then all image options over here. I think it's position, yep, and I just set both of those to 0, I believe. And now this image is just kind of like a background that's just there. Like I can go ahead and write tab over. So, oh, not tab, you can space over. So maybe let's kind of go over here and say wheel. Again, these labels don't necessarily have to be super detailed, but we're just kind of labeling what some things are. Maybe let's go ahead and label one of these motors. And unselect the white highlight. Let's go over and motor. And maybe you want to do like a little arrow or something. Again, it doesn't super matter. The main thing here is that we're labeling these diagrams. They're not unlabeled. So that, like, bare minimum, we hit it. And then the last thing we need is citations. So again, I typically do citations as half size of my regular font. So let's go ahead and scale that down. And then title of resource or source code. If we go back, that's the title of the video. And any of my videos, any of my resources, as long as you cite them, you can use whatever you want. Some people might not let you use their stuff, but any of my resources, you guys are always free to use. And the next thing we need is authors. So date of publication or release. YouTube videos are really easy about this because they just put that right there for us. Version, it's not applicable here. And then location is just going to be the link for this video. And we don't need to copy the timestamp necessarily. Actually, that timestamp's not correct. All right, and that's it for citations. It's that easy to cite your sources and to have labels in your diagrams. So always make sure you have these. Now, let's kind of go ahead and insert row below. And again, very important thing, we have 3 or more possible solutions. So let's repeat this 2 more times with some other different drive-based types. All right, and that's kind of it for brainstorming for a bare minimum. Again, more detail, adding pros and cons, more detailed explanations here, multiple pictures. The diagrams could be better labeled, but they are labeled. But right here, we have hit all of these minimum criteria. So I would give this probably a 4, just because it does the bare minimum to be considered expert. Which again, that's pretty good. You're getting 80% of your points. You can't think about this like school grades, because scoring 80% on your notebook is like a 40 out of 50, which is a really good score to get most of the time. So yeah, again, bare minimum, you can always add more detail here, but this is at a minimum what you should always have. Now let's go with a new page, heading, and go over here to select best solution and plan. I usually like to break these up into 2 steps, so let's just do select best solution. Now right here, in order to select our solution, you have 2 options to you, and really you should probably do both if you're trying to get maximum points, but you should select it through testing and or a decision matrix. So we are going to use a decision matrix here because that is easy to do. So let me show you how to just make a basic decision matrix. Alright, so now we have our stating what the decision matrix is going to be, and then a table for our decision matrix. So on the left hand side, typically what you want to do is you want to list all the things that you're going to be comparing. So we have tank drive, H drive, X drive, and let me just capitalize that for consistency. Also, on the note of tables, I don't usually leave these as visible as tables. You can go through here, and if you click on that box right there, you can set the background lines to white so that your tables don't actually look like they are tables. And then for something like this, I would, just to make it clear, I would typically have the outside table not look like a table with white font, but then the inside one, decision matrix, you do want to look like a table. Then Up at the top here, we're going to put all the things that we're going to be comparing or ranking these drive bases on. So let's go ahead and put complexity, and then the maneuverability of the drive base. And typically I would have like 4 or 5 things here, like complexity, maneuverability, weight, motors needed. Those are all valid things that you can put in. And then just the total. Oops. So, and also you can add weightings, which is basically where you give, maybe this one's rated on a scale of 1 to 5, and this one's on a scale of 1 to 10, just to make some things more important. But for simplicity here, I'll just say 1 to 10. There we go. So now 10 is being better, 1 is being worse. Again, you could write those things down, probably a good thing to do. But tank drive, will say that's the simplest. H drive next. And usually these numbers are pretty arbitrary. You pretty much just make up whatever numbers you want that seem reasonable and is going to make the idea you want win. That's not what you're supposed to do, but it's what teams do for notebooking typically. And then let's go ahead and maybe do something like that. And now tank drive. And now tank drive is the winner, so we will be building a tank drive. And again, I typically say something like that. Here you could say other things that you could do to help improve points is like go through and specifically state how you're coming up with these numbers, like explain what complexity is, explain how you're figuring out which drive base is what, explain where you're getting your numbers from, but those aren't required to be considered a decision matrix at a minimum. And then right here we can say, so just give a brief recap, like tank drive won the decision matrix, so we'll be building that. Alright, and now let's go ahead and make a new page, and this will now be planning. So if we look at the criteria, it's very vague here. Fully describes the plan to implement the solution. So we need details about things like if you're building a drive base and you didn't do select for this, which I would recommend doing like selection with decision matrices for as many things as possible, but obviously you're not going to do it for everything. Like you're not going to do a select for how many C-channel holes long are we making our drive base? Are we going to use caps nuts or lock nuts on this specific screw? So plan is where you should just mention that that's why you're doing things and maybe give a brief explanation of why that's what you're doing. Typically, also, this is where you want like CAD drawings or sketches of what you're planning to build. So I like to give all my specifications and then just some planning stuff. So, and a good, if you don't want to do an explanation for something that's too deep, is just material constraints. And that also kind of helps with some of the later stuff. So just boom, simple, listing out the basics of all of the facts and specifications on the robot. And yeah, especially some of the things like your drive base speed, I'd recommend doing a decision matrix for. But again, this works, bare minimum concept. Now let's go ahead, here's a CAD base of the drive base, so let's just say, and again, typically you want to give steps of how you CAD your drive base. Like usually CADing a robot for me is about 10 pages in my notebook, because you go through, explain a lot of the logic and process behind it, but as a bare minimum, we have covered the plan. Probably not going to get fully describe the plan to implement the solution, but at least partial credit, because you're mentioning a plan. And the big thing here is you want to at least be in the proficient category. You cannot be in the emerging category for any of these. Bare minimum is what you should have here, and some teams don't even have that. All right, now after planning, we move on to building, which, as you can see here, build and program the solution. So record the steps to build and program the solution includes enough detail that the reader can follow the logic used by the team to develop the robot design, as well as recreate the robot design from documentation. So basically for building code, and again I break these up into 2 sections, you need detail, lots and lots of detail, which I'm not necessarily going to have in this video. I'll probably have the key steps more likely, and then you need logic to develop the robot design, so why you're doing the things that you're doing, and then be able to recreate it. How? So why and how are the 2 most important things to have here. But again, the main thing is just, if you're not shooting for expert, bare minimum, which is what I'll be doing here, you record your key steps. And again, these dates I'll kind of get back to later. But right here, we have building the wheels. Let's go ahead and insert a nice table for this. I think it's about that many pictures. And let me go ahead and import my images here. So steps is important, so I will just say like step 1. So right now we're hitting point 4. So right now we're hitting the points for what we did, and then let's give a little bit of logic behind what we're doing it. This will ensure that the gear spins with the wheel, which is required and will help reduce slop. And again, more logic would be good here, and more detail on the steps would also be good. And again, this isn't super detailed. This isn't going to score super highly, but it will get you into the proficient category. The more detail about the steps and like how you could replicate this, the more pictures you have. Pictures are really important. Like, take as many pictures as you want. You're never going to be notebooking and say to yourself, wow, I have too many pictures. Like, you can just slap a bunch of pictures in, no problem. And then just more logic about like, why is it important that the gear spins with the wheel? Those sort of things. Why are you using nylock nuts here instead of flat nuts or caps nuts? Those sort of things would be how you could up the quality even more if you really wanted to. And then again, let me just go ahead and insert my pictures here. All right, pictures inserted, and then let's just go through and briefly explain what each step is and why we're doing it. So place bearings. And again, not a lot of detail here, but this is going to meet your bare minimum. The more detail you provide here, the better. And that's where the bulk of probably my time goes for notebooking, is detail on build entries. But that's enough to basically document just the bare minimum. Definitely going to fall into the key steps of record the solution. And you probably can't follow all of the logic there, but I'm giving some at least. But again, this took me like 2 minutes to write all that information out, so not that hard. And again, we have our pictures for the inner drive base, so let's go ahead and just briefly get some steps and logic behind these. And then again, just repeat this process for the full drive base. Alright, and that pretty much wraps it up for build steps. Again, just pretty much the same things as before. Add more detail if you want to be better, but this is, I would say, minimum what you should have. Now we can move on to the other step of build and program the solution, which is program. So, programming the drive. Again, we'll go ahead and slap our very real entry on it, which I'll get to those dates in a bit. And then for insert, what I typically like to do is, at a minimum, just copy paste your code in. But really, you want more details. So let me just kind of go through that. Let me get the code pasted in there, and then we'll kind of jump on to the next part. So I have my code, and I honestly just I have my Vex code open here. I do Control-A, Control-C, and just paste that whole thing in there. Again, you could probably format this to be a little bit nicer. But also, again, that doesn't super matter for points. You can just, you could go through and clean up. We don't necessarily need all of that code in there. But the main thing is just all the code's in there, which is a really easy way to just slap something in and call it good. And, I mean, technically it's still valid because C++ can let you do fun, silly shape stuff. And then on the left-hand side, comment your code. Just have comments. This program is already nicely commented because this is the one from the how to code video that I made a while ago. Up in the top right, I'll put the thing up there. So it's already nicely commented and set up. So all I kind of have to do is I like comments, and those are good for like judges who like code. But then you'll also get like English teachers judging your notebook. So I just like to brief section of like set up the code. And then we can go down there and then be like set up the motors. And it doesn't need to be super descriptive because the people who actually know how to code will be reading the comments in your code. Oops. Actually, that mechanism doesn't exist yet. So there we go. And boom, we have code, and technically the code is annotated. Not well, but again, more detail you have here, more detail you have in your comments, the better you're going to score. But they could at least replicate it well. So you're not going to be in the developing category of this. So now, with build and programming, now let's finally move on to test solution. Now, there's a few different things that I like to see with testing. The first is your steps to test the solution, and then the results. And I also like to have like what are the goals of the test, and then what are like an analysis of like, hey, what do these results mean? Did we pass? Did we fail? That sort of thing. So, oops. So just reference back to our entry robot goals. We want to drive across the field in 5 seconds. Now let's go ahead and list our procedure. And if you have pictures, that would be, you can put these in here. This would be good. I just don't happen to have any. And the more detail you have, I would say the rubric is definitely weighted more heavily towards procedure because it's record all of the steps. And then it's just like include the test results. So the results are almost an afterthought. But if you see over here, like record the key steps, record all the steps. It's very much focused on steps for how you're testing. So the procedure is the most important part of the testing. So definitely put the more detail there. And then here, obviously, more detail would be good. Like, obviously, this is going to have a very large amount of experimental error because you're just doing a stopwatch. So, like, maybe talk about that. These are things that you could do, or like, how are you countering this? Maybe have a more precise setup. Those sort of things would all be good to have. And then also important to have your results because it does say to include them. And for results, I'm just going to insert another table. So and I'm going to just fake the data here. Obviously, if you have data, use it. And if you are going to fake your data, make it realistic. These numbers are not very realistic. Maybe if you're feeling fancy, put on like standard deviation and whatnot, but average of 4 seconds. So then now we can go ahead and say we met our goal as the robot crossed the field in 4 seconds and we wanted to do it in 5. And more precision would be good here because obviously you should have more than 1 second of precision. All right, and then we say we met our goal on time because that was the other goal that we set. So now this is fine for testing. Again, more detail in the procedure, more analysis of stuff, pictures would all be good things to have. Now, next section is repeat the design process. You can't cheese this. It's just go back through the design process multiple times to show improvement. Like do another, this is just a drive base that I have documented right here. Go back through and do another design cycle on like, maybe we're adding a clock to the end of the drive base to pick up rings. Those sort of things. So you can go back to the design cycle there in order to add more features to your robot. The other good way, which is the only way I would get full points, is if you're going back through this for multiple robots. If you do a full rebuild, you should be going back through the design process from the beginning, documenting your other robot design. But again, this one isn't required. If you get an emerging here, it's bad point-wise, but you'll still be considered for awards. Now, moving on to these last couple sections, these are just kind of overall things, and we will go and add some stuff for project management. But independent inquiry is just make sure you have citations everywhere is what I'm looking for there, and you're not like blatantly copying someone's design. Like, don't have a page that's like, yes, this is VexU Team's Jayhawk robot. We will now be copying it hole for hole. Don't say anything like that. Like, at least try and make it look like you're coming up with your own ideas, and then cite every source that you have for your outside ideas. And I also try and make all of my images, like for brainstorming, I try and do in-house as much as possible. Or like same with code templates. So like, if you are going to do brainstorming, try and make your own sketches and CAD drawings if you can. Obviously, not everyone has the capabilities to do that, but ideally try and make your own stuff, or at least draw a crude sketch and put it in, and then supplement it with something else. That way, it's not just somebody else's stuff there. That one's a newer one. It wasn't there when I started judging. I don't remember when they added it exactly. So most judges, that's probably has the most variability. Usability and completeness is just kind of like overall level of detail. So again, just the more detail you have, the better. Make sure your notebook's readable. It doesn't have any errors, that sort of thing. You have table of contents, those sort of things, which actually, speaking of table of contents, we should be able to go through here and update that. And wow, we got a nice table of contents right there. And then the final one we're going to cover is record of team and project management. So this one, again, pretty easy to choose. We're going to go back through and add some stuff. So complete record of the team and project assignments. So team meeting notes, including goals, decisions, building and programming accomplishments, design cycles are easily identified. Resource constraints, including time material, are noted throughout. So what I like to do is I'd like to have some pages that are pretty much dedicated for this, that we will do at the end of every single day. So let's go ahead and go here. And oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Here we go. So we can just have April 2nd, 2025. Reflection. So obviously our date's just going to be that. And then let's just go through and specifically state out all of the things that it's asking for. So complete record of team and project assignments. So let me just get a table in there real quick. Did I? Yeah. Okay. So we have team assignments. Boom. Team meeting notes, including goals, decisions. So let's start with goals. And we actually already have these. So we can just kind of copy and paste those in. You can also add just more specific goals for these, which I do sometimes. Like, hey, let's try and, like small scale things. Like, let's try and get the claw done tomorrow. That sort of thing. So let's maybe say all right, so we hit our goals. Next up, decisions. What current decisions have we made? That we need to cross the field in 5 seconds and have our robot done by April 1st. Or not April 1st, April 21st. Next up, design cycles are easily identified. Right now, we only have one design cycle, so that's not super big. But like, if you start a rebuild, make it very obvious this is a rebuild. Like, I have color-coded for different design cycles, so it's extremely obvious, like, hey, we are now building a new robot, starting a new design cycle. So we could put something like, if you really want to make sure you get those points and you only have one design cycle, maybe like current design cycle 1. And then resource constraints, including time and material, are noted throughout. This is where you would put Gantt charts if you have them. I'm not going to cover Gantt charts because it's quite complicated and harder to implement, but let's just put in like a rough timeline. And then the other one we want is material constraints. And material constraints, you can just say like, we haven't started building, we don't have any constraints yet. And then let's maybe add some brief stuff for the timeline. So CAD, let's go ahead and say that we want the CAD done by April 8th. All right, and now we have a timeline, and we have hit every single one of these points in the record in team and project management. Not well, but then it also says noted throughout, so we need to consistently do these. So let me just kind of copy this entry right here. And you could do these daily, that would probably be best. But let's just kind of do one for, what date is this? This is April 8th. And I would just cover all of the things that have happened since your last progress update or whatever. And then timeline, you can just like do a little check or highlight, so this was a success. And update your timeline if things need to be changed later on. And bill of materials would also be good for material constraints if you have that. It's always good to keep track of what parts you have. And then let's just do one more of these, maybe after test solution. Again, the more of these you have, the better. But this will, like if you just have them maybe like daily, might get you with really good detail like a 5. But even if you still have the detail there and you're doing them like once a week, that's still probably going to score really high. And then this is April 19th. Decisions would be anything that you've decided since the last meeting, so there's nothing really here because the robot's kind of done. So you could just say something like, our prior plans have all worked without flaw. Then all current goals have been met. All right, and that's kind of it for just something basic. And then this is just the general flow. You'll want to just keep repeating this throughout the season more and more. It doesn't take a lot of effort. Like this whole thing took me, I took a couple breaks in between, but maybe like an hour, hour and a half at most. It's like it doesn't take a lot of effort. And like if you had an innovate form, which I guess that's the one other thing I didn't really mention. Oops. Like put your innovate form right there, which as you can see in the guide to judging is all right here. So make sure you fill that in. But like I would, if nobody else met the criteria for the Innovate Award and somebody had a notebook of this caliber, I would give it the Innovate Award. Which, again, this doesn't take a lot of effort. So please keep these things all in mind. Again, this is the minimum. Do better. Try new things. Just make sure you have at least all the things that are mentioned here in your notebooks. And go win some awards next season. I'm intentionally publishing this video pretty much right as you should be starting your notebook for next season. As always, if you enjoyed this, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next one.